DMT, if you take it orally, is destroyed by enzymes in your gut, so it has to be smoked unless you have a chemical strategy for inactivating those enzymes. So assuming you smoke it, it comes on in about 30 seconds, and if you're a leather-lunged hashashin, you can maybe get it in one swell foot, but it takes most people about 3 hits. And the first thing you notice is that it's as though all the air has been drawn out of the room you're in. Suddenly the colors come forward and the edges sharpen. This is really happening. It has an extraordinary effect at low doses on visual acuity. So does psilocybin. And then you close your eyes. You feel very peculiar. A kind of anesthesia sweeps through your body, a kind of numbing and yet a sense of a building bubble of energy. You close your eyes, and after a few seconds you see forming in front of you what I call the chrysanthemum. It's a floral mandala, usually in yellow and orange, most people say. And it's slowly turning, it's like a wall, but it's a hallucination, but it's right here, right in front of you. And you watch it for about 15 seconds. If it stabilizes, you need one more hit. But what usually happens is that after about 15 seconds of contemplating this thing, it's as though suddenly whatever was holding you back, the cable is cut, and you are just propelled through this membrane, and you hear a sound like a bread wrapper being crumpled, a cellophane bread wrapper being crumpled and thrown away, or the crackling of flames. This is, according to a friend of mine, your radio intellecti exiting the anterior fontanelle at the top of your head. But he could be wrong. But whatever it is, and then you hear a tone, which is, it could be reproduced on a synthesizer. It's that, but it keeps going and becomes hypersonic, supersonic, subsonic, I don't know. And there is a sense of, literally a membrane is ruptured, and now you're there. And what happens to me is, the first thing I hear is a cheer, a yell of greeting. It's on their second album, the Pink Floyd have a song in which they sing, the gnomes have a new way to say hooray. Well, you break into this gnomeness, and it's a very specifically characterized place. It is domed, it's indirectly lit, not brightly lit, but it's softened lighting of some sort. It's comfortable, but all of that is hard to focus on and relatively inconsequential, because the main thing that's happening is these things come bounding towards you like greyhounds, and there are many of them. These jeweled, self-dribbling, transforming basketballs, which look like iridescent electric radiolaria or something. I mean, they are diatomaceous neon transforms made of syntax or some damn thing like that. And they come toward you, and you have to deal with yourself in this situation, because most people, in my reaction, is absolute amazement, complete hysterical disbelief. I mean, you just say, my God, what is happening? It comes so quickly that it isn't like a drug. where, you know, you deep breathe and you close your eyes and you wait for an hour and you slowly summon it out of its crevice. It's not like that. It's like you were struck by lightning. In fact, some people think they have been struck by lightning, that they never got to the drug, that just as they raised it to their lips, they were struck by lightning, or a jet fighter fell out of the sky, or something. And then you have to ask yourself, is this okay? Because it's so radical and it happens so quickly, and your eyes are wide open and you don't see anything recognizable. Three-dimensional space, the room you were in, everything, it's gone. Instead, this place, and then they tell you, they try to reassure you, although they're not very reassuring. What they say is, don't give way to amazement. Don't abandon yourself to wonder. Basically, don't be a jerk and a rube, you know. Pay attention. Pay attention to what is happening. And then they proceed to do a very intense form of team teaching. They come bounding up, they present themselves. They also do this weird thing where they jump into your chest and then they jump back out. So you're having this sucking in and out of your body thing. They jump in and out of your chest, and they are singing and squeaking and squealing in some kind of elf glossolalia, which you can see. This is very important. They speak a language which you look at, you don't hear, and they make objects which are like super puns of some sort, in that the object is not one thing. It is somehow several things simultaneously. The way a pun attains its effect by being simultaneously more than one thing. But these are not verbal puns. These are objectified puns in three-dimensional space, and they're funny. And the whole thing is pervaded by the word zany is what I use. It's a form of humor. It's a form of merriment, but you can't entirely relax around it because you can't entirely be sure that you're getting the joke. So it's like it's a humor with an edge to it. And they are showing you these jeweled, I've compared them to Fabergé eggs. And when they show you these things, you can tell by looking at them that if you could bring a single one of these objects, no larger than an orange, into this world, it would end the debate. I mean, all you would have to do is show it to somebody, and they would say, that's impossible, but yet it's happening, so therefore my reality is dissolving. I mean, it's somehow to gaze upon these objects is to be forever corrupted for ordinary consciousness. Make them with their voices. These objects are quasi-alive. The objects themselves can sing and make other objects. So you're like in this, a cross between Santa's workshop, Tiffany's, and the basement of the Metropolitan Museum, and they're offering you all this time. I've somehow stretched the thread too tightly, and now I'm never going to make my way back. And they're saying, no, that's not what's happening. This is what's happening. Pay attention. Look. And then it just fades very suddenly, and they sense it coming. They have urgency because they know the window is tremendously narrow. And in the final moments, in some cases, I recall, they literally, it recedes away, or you pull away from it, and they say, déjà vu, and then you open your eyes, and you're in the room you left. It's like 1,000 mics of LSD or something. You are more loaded than you have ever been in your life, and you immediately proclaim, my God, I'm completely down. And, you know, the walls are rubbery, the Persian carpet is crawling around, your friends have faceted faces and look like they just climbed out of one of Billy Meyer's starships, but you're absolutely completely down. You accept this as ordinary. It's all you can do to keep from kissing the good earth, because where you were was so much removed from that there is no comparison. Well, now after doing this a number of times, because the first time you do it, the goal is pretty much to live through it. I mean, it's like being shot out of I think it was Tim Leary's metaphor. He said it's like being shot out of a cannon with Baroque barreling, and afterwards people want you to draw the barreling, when what you were trying to do was live through the experience. But after you do it many, many times, 10, 15, it depends on how bright you are and how able to resist freaking out you are, my impression became, and this is astonishing to me based on what I've said so far, this is someone very strange. It's someone's idea of a reassuring environment for a human being. This place you end up, which is the weirdest place you could ever conceive of or imagine, has been specifically designed by someone to be as mundane, ordinary, and like this world as they could possibly make it. Not only that, the impression that I have is the vibe of this place, if you will, is it's a nursery. It's a playpen, in fact. And these toys, these things, these elves, are nothing more than the equivalent of stringing a string of colored plastic objects over a bassinet. They're to teach you spatial relationships and hand-eye coordination. You are briefly in a nursery for receiving human beings who have just crossed over from hyperspace. Well, imagine if all you knew about this world was a nursery in a maternity ward or a home somewhere, and you're trying to deduce the nature of the universe from a 30-second visit to a human nursery. That's the kind of position we're in. And I think that is what gave me the notion that this has to do with the after-death state. Apparently, the soul is literally being born into this other dimension, and the soul is not, it's exactly like this world. When you're born into this world, you're just a little worm of a thing, you know. You have to be held by your mother, you have to be swaddled, you have to be kept away from bright lights, breezes, men with cigars, and so forth. And the soul, as it transits into that place, you immediately meet extended existence of your soul in an entirely new domain. Yeah. You mean stayed in that place? No. And it seems to me unlikely that anyone would, because interesting about DMT is that it occurs naturally in the human brain. We all make it all the time. And so in a sense, this is not a drug at all. This is a human metabolite that you're getting a tremendous overdose of. But the fact that it occurs naturally in the human brain means that you have chemical pathways, biosynthetic pathways that can deal with it. That's why it lasts so short a time. One way of talking about the toxicity of a drug is to ask the question, how long before you feel perfectly normal after taking this drug? If you have a drug that 24 or 48 hours after you take it, you still have lower back pain and you're lying in warm baths and avoiding ringing telephones and don't want to talk to anybody, that's a toxic drug. I don't care whether it's coke, methadone, or LSD. You shouldn't. That's not good. DMT, 10 minutes, within 10 to 15 minutes after taking it, you not only are down, you can't tell you did it. There's no residuum, no lingering headache, no dryness of mouth, no dilated pupil, nothing. It's like you took an ice cube and hurled it into a blast furnace, and then you went looking for it 15 minutes later. It's not to be found. It ain't there. Well, this is amazing, because this is the strongest psychedelic there is. You'd think that you'd have to put ice packs on your head for a week after this, and instead it's completely gone. So Rupert and I, in talking about this, he developed the idea of what he called a necrotic compound. He thinks that DMT, that at death, you flood your system with DMT, that this is what these pathways exist for, and that it sets you up for dying, and that if you can, and I gave DMT once to a Tibetan Lama, a very old one, not one of these alcoholic fundraising lamas, the real thing. And guy took it like a man. He was probably 92. And afterwards he said, it's the lesser life. He said, if you go further, you can't return. That's the limit. Beyond that, there is no fail-safe. And he was perfectly matter-of-fact about it, and I took him at his word. I mean, if anybody should have known, this was the dude. And I think it's a tremendous argument for hope. And you see, it's not only an argument for hope, it means that if we could get the infantile, shit-brained, drug-phobic yahoos sent back to wherever it is that they are going to be sent to practice their family values, then we could actually do significant research and find out what's going on here. It's an object of legitimate research. We don't have to genuflect in front of this like it's a religious mystery and will always be unknowable. In principle, what we need to do is you explore this dimension the way you explore any unknown dimension. You send people of great courage and descriptive skill in with their notebooks, their telescopes, their tape recorders, or whatever is the equivalent for this job, and then you find out what it is. And I think that the destiny of the species may be spun into this. It may not be. It may be that this transition into hyperspace is not as inevitable as I previously assured you. It may be that we have to do something on this side. We have to meet them halfway through the mountain. They're boring toward us. We have to alert ourselves to the fact that a tunnel is possible and then get cracking, with dynamite, which is an amalgam for DMT. Yeah.
Terence, can you go into briefly say something about the distinction now between what you have spoke about the last 10 minutes with distinction between the Fabergé eggs and basketballs and self-transforming machine elves, and that one may occur by going into the Amazon canopy and experiencing some type of preparation prepared by the natives. Is that organically mixed, earthly-based hive similar to the synthesized DMT? Now, I have taken DMT many, many years ago, but it would seem that the natives may describe it, at least, in a much different fashion than yourself. What is the distinction? And then also, if you can hit on after that the distinction between that and psilocybin.
Well, the difference is not as great as maybe your question implies. First of all, the thing that is so interesting about DMT is if the only requirement is that you be able to hold the toke, and if you cough and lose it, then it's murky and mucked up. In the case of ayahuasca, which is what you're asking about, well, I'll explain to the group. Remember how I said that DMT is destroyed in your gut, so you have to smoke it. But then I added the caveat that unless you somehow inactivate this enzyme system in your gut, which will destroy it, the DMT. Well, it turns out there's a way to do that. The enzyme system is called monoamine oxidase, and there are compounds called monoamine oxidase inhibitors. If you take a monoamine oxidase or MAO inhibitor, then, and follow it with oral DMT, then the DMT will not be destroyed in your gut. It will actually be absorbed into the lining of the small intestine, a large intestine, and then passed into the bloodstream, and you will have psychedelic intoxication. Well, in the Amazon, this has been understood by the shamans for a long, long time. And so they take two plants. One, Banisteriopsis cuppi, a large woody vine, a twining liana, and it actually contains a powerful short-acting monoamine oxidase inhibitor. And they take this vine and they pulverize it, and they combine it in a large pot of water with the leaves of another plant which contains DMT. It may be one of several plants. It's usually Psychotria viridis. Then they boil these two things together, and then for hours, and then they pour the water off and save it in a jug, and put fresh water on this mess of two different plants, and boil it again for hours. And then they pour the two water fractions together, and they get rid of all the solid matter. They throw it away. It's now been cooked for 6 to 8 hours. And they take this watery fraction, several gallons, and they drive it down over a hot fire until they get something, a dark brown, thick liquid that is truly horrifying to ingest, because the taste is so ghastly, because all the salts and sugars and God knows what else have been concentrated into this stuff. But this is now a beverage, a liquid. I love it that in the literature they call it a psychoactive beverage. And when you drink it, the compound from the woody vine, harmine, inhibits the MAO, and the DMT passes through and enters the bloodstream. And instead of a 10-minute experience that reaches the apex of intensity in 2 minutes, you get an experience which is drawn out, stretched out over about 4 to 6 hours. Now, usually, this is not, it's a psychedelic experience. It's similar to mushrooms in some ways. But if you really make it stiff, if you really put the pedal to the metal on the amount of Psychotria viridis or DMT-containing leaf that you put into this stuff, then after about 2 hours, you can slowly, by sitting in darkness, by practicing breath control, you can slowly manipulate it into a place where you then say, you know, by gosh and begolly, we've made it to the elf nest. Here it is. So I think that great shamans, courageous shamans, have always been able to make their way into the presence of this thing. But I put the great qualifier in front of the word shamans because in my actual field experience in the Amazon, what I discovered was once it got you loaded enough to be comparable to, say, 4 grams of mushrooms, most of these guys would look at you in horror if you suggested that it was only twice as strong as it should be. The shamans all over the world have an ambivalent attitude toward these dimensions they go into. Very few just hurl themselves delightedly into complete boundary dissolution. I had a guy tell me once, he said, you think just because we run around wearing penis sheaths that this stuff is easy for us to do? Well, I've got news for you. It's as hard for us as it is for anybody. It's hard for human beings to surrender to something so strange. I could never get ayahuasca to carry me into the DMT nest until I made it myself. And then, with nobody, you know, holding my elbow and telling me how much Psychotria viridis I should put in, I was able to jack it up until finally it was truly horrifyingly strong. And that's what you want. I mean, we're not interested in colored lights and dancing mice here. So, now let me see. Did I cover the waterfront? No. Comparison to DMT, to psilocybin.
Psilocybin, in that you explained one time in one of the past lectures that the earthy or UFO type images that appear from the psilocybin as opposed to the more earthly mother goddess connection of the ayahuasca.
But I think if you push the ayahuasca hard, it all begins to migrate in this direction. Psilocybin, you know, I advocate 5 dried grams in silent darkness. 8 dried grams in silent darkness will give you the indistinguishable from a DMT flash. The problem is, you know, one thing about DMT that is both frustrating and liberating is that it's so brief. Basically, it's like a roller coaster. The great consolation is this is only going to last 5 minutes. If you climbed on a roller coaster of super intensity and as they dropped the bar over your lap, they said, oh yeah, this is the 4-hour trip, then you would say, well, you know, hold on.
It does appear, though, that by IV, which is mostly how I did it years ago, that it seemed that it was extended to about 30 to 40 minutes.
IV DMT?
Yeah.
Do you mean that you shot it intravenously? You don't mean that it was a perfusion pump situation? No. Well, see, I've talked to people who've done research on DMT, and a surprising conclusion that comes out of those discussions is that shooting it is not as intense as smoking it. Shooting it, well, yeah, it sounds fairly intense, but people who do both say shooting it can't lay a candle to. And and this is a funny thing, so I'll just mention it as an aside. Drug researchers love to shoot drugs into their experimental subjects. They love the syringe as the route of administration because you get better numerical data because you can measure the dose absolutely, and then you hit them and you know they got it. If you smoke something, you may, obviously when you can hold your breath no longer and you exhale, smoke comes into the room. That's not part of your dose. And sometimes there's a residuum in the bottom of the pipe. That's not part of your dose. So in the name of precision, people who've done research on DMT have always shot it. Even the recent study out at the University of New Mexico, it was by injection. I tried to persuade them to do a section with smoking, but this argument for numerical precision carried the day. But the effect of relying on intravenous injection like that is that no one in the clinical situation has ever observed or experienced the flash that I'm talking about. I don't think you can attain it except by smoking.
Now, how about the penis snuffs that the Yanomamos and
No, I've done those, and that is, well, tell the truth, let the chips fall where they may. Highly overrated for several reasons. First of all, you have to snuff close to a tablespoon of these toasted and powdered Anadenanthera peregrina seeds, and there's a lot of cellulose there, and so you do not absorb it instantly. The other thing is it's so physically unpleasant to do it that there's a tendency to cut low on the dose, because when the standard method of administering edema is you have a hollow reed, like a bamboo reed about this long. You fill it with this powdered, toasted sawdust, essentially, that has been reduced to flour. And you get up on your haunches, and your friend comes over, and you put the tube up your nostril, and he blows. He takes a huge lungful of air, and he just blows as hard as he can. Well, the effect is like being hit in the face with a 2x4. I mean, you stagger backwards, you salivate, it's intensely painful, you scream, you squirm around in the dirt, and then you get back up on your haunches, and by that time he has loaded the tube for the second nostril. And then the whole thing happens all over again, except now you're salivating, your eye is swollen up, your sinuses are filled with this gunk, and you do it again, same thing, scream, squirm in the dirt, so forth and so on. Then you stagger over out of the sun into the shade and sit with your saliva just pouring out of your mouth, and after about 5 minutes, you begin to drift into a psychedelic state of some sort. But there is no sense of a rush, of a splitting of the world into two halves. It's not an effective route of administration.
Well, how about what do you call the chorus spirits?
Oh well, once they get intoxicated, then they play this strange game, which is almost characteristic of this white Yanomamo cultural group. Guys square off. They stand about 3 feet apart from each other, and by some means equivalent to tossing a coin, it's been decided who will go first. So the guy who goes first is totally loaded on this stuff, and he has mucus running out of his nose, saliva running out of his mouth. His eyes are swollen, practically swollen shut. He pulls back his hand, and he hits the other guy right in the center of the chest as hard as he can. So the guy either loses his feet or doesn't. Anyway, he grunts like a bull and stands there. He also is in the same state. Then he pulls back, and then he does it. And they keep doing this until somebody is knocked off their spot. And when you interview them later about this, what you're told is your ability to stand on your spot depends on how many of these hukuli spirits you have inside your chest. And so this is some kind of Yanomamo psychology meeting the raw data of the DMT experience. I don't know what they're talking about, but it has something to do with the DMT things that jump in and out of your chest when you smoke it. They believe that they say the demon from the tree will live in your chest, and the more of these tree demons inside your chest you have, the more physically able to resist being knocked off your spot you are, and the more shamanically empowered you are. But this goes to a point I often make with my groups, which is, one ethnic group or one culture's drug is another person's pain in the neck. I've taken awful drugs that the people, after it was over with, you'd say, God, you guys do this all the time. It's really kind of, and they say, yeah, well, it takes getting used to, and we really don't do it all that often, only ceremonies. And you're right, most people are glad to get it over with and go back to the palm beer.
So your experience is basically that it's too caveman-like. It's very hard on the system biologically, and it makes it so that the time that you could be having in exploring these strange dimensions is somehow inhibited.
Yeah, I don't think in the Bina taking situation that you ever get enough all at once to the synapses in sufficient concentration to deliver you over into what I'm describing occurring on
you took ayahuasca and then did the snuff right after you drank ayahuasca.
Strangely enough, though, those cultural groups do not overlap. Where there is ayahuasca, there is never Ipina. Where there is Ipina, if there is ayahuasca, there never
comes. There's no ethnography done right now on that. That may be an area where someone would want to explore by bringing in non-indigenous sources of ayahuasca into the Yanomamo area.
Well, people are, traditional people are surprisingly conservative. I've sat with ayahuasqueros and done their brew and talked to them about DMT, and then they say, well, describe it. And so then I will describe it as I described it to you here. And then my best guy said, well, I don't know, it sounds a little intense. I think I'll take a pass on it. And he was my mentor in the domain of ayahuasca. It's pretty stout stuff. I think that, shamans have always, looked over the fence, looked through the keyhole, stepped through the doorway. But I think DMT, pure crystalline DMT, or ayahuasca specifically brewed to reality obliterating doses, is the only way you can approach this place. Yeah.
I'm wondering, on the experience you talk about your being taught.
Mention that, yes.
Yeah, the second part would be how have you done this?
I've done it maybe 30 times. I haven't done it for a couple of years.
DMT or?
No, DMT. Sometimes I think it's a young man's game, or sometimes I'm just getting chicken shit, This is not a drug of abuse, let me tell you. I know people who say it's their favorite drug, and you say, well, when was the last time you did it? And they say 1968. And they're still processing to feel no need to go back and have a second look. What was the first part of your question?
What kind of knowledge?
The knowledge. The knowledge is interesting. The knowledge is they want me to make language that you can see. They absolutely are convinced that this ability to make things visible with sound can be taught. And that's what they want you to do. They demonstrate it. They say, see what we're doing? See what we're doing? Now do it! And you say, and say, no excuses. We don't have a lot of time. It's almost over. Do it. Do it. And then you attempt to do it, and you discover in that place you can do this. But why this is so important? Because when you come back to this world and listen to tape recordings of yourself doing it, it's gibberish of some sort. It's a kind of neurologically driven glossolalia. It's like, it's a language unhinged from the necessity of meaning. And yet, it is true that when you do it in that place, it's absolutely ecstatic. It's like sex, but sex is sort of like a white light kind of thing. This is like a colored spectrum. If you could put the sexual experience through a prism and change the purity of orgasm into a spectrum of stuff, then it would be like this language. It's pure poetry. It's poetry so thick you can literally cut it with a knife. And they want you to do this. And they are absolutely passionate about this is what we are here to teach you. How to speak in a language that can be seen. And, a language which could be seen would be a kind of telepathy. If you could see what I mean, you would see my thoughts. The way we communicate, small mouth noises, and the assumption of shared dictionaries, an assumption which is never borne out by careful questioning, is a miserable way to communicate. If we could see our linguistic intentionality, it would be the equivalent of seeing our minds. And so this is what they want us to do. Now, maybe if one were truly dead, they wouldn't be so urgent about it. And they would be like a relative leaning over a bassinet and holding up objects and saying, look at this, baby. Look at this. This is a bell or something. But definitely what they teach is in the domain of language. And it's not a teaching which can be said, like love one another, or, if it's juicy, eat it over the sink. It's more an ability locked in your physiological structure that we're not using. They want us to speak in colored light. And it's their agenda, it's not mine. I haven't the faintest idea why that is so compelling to them. Well, that's a little unfair, because I've given a lot of thought to it. But initially, I couldn't figure it out. We'll, I'm sure, get more into this afternoon. It is, the little self-transforming elf machine informs me, lunchtime. Thank you for putting up with this. I appreciate your silent scorn, or whatever it is.
So lunch will